Hello viewers, welcome back to our YouTube channel. Today we want to look at something new, and I want us to start our tutorials on quantitative techniques. Want to start on our new topic, quantitative techniques. Quantitative techniques. Quantitative techniques. This is a CPA level 1 paper that I want us to start on, and maybe we can try to look at the course outline first, but before that we can have to understand that the objective or the overall aim of this paper is to develop an understanding of the knowledge, understanding of the mathematical principles to develop an understanding of the mathematical principles and concepts. Mathematical principles and concepts which are useful in problem solving, which are useful in problem solving, and decision making. And problem solving. Maybe you can try and download the course outline, SPA, go to student resources, so we download specifically for this new syllabus of 2021. 2023. It was effective 2023. So we pick out quantitative techniques. So this is the course syllabus, and you can see that we have it as paper 3. It feeds into different course units at different levels of CPA certification, and you can see that our quantitative techniques can also help you in paper 6, that is cost and management accounting. It can also help you into your management decision and control paper, that's paper on level 2, that's MDC, and also financial management. Then it pushes to level 3 in terms of advanced financial management. So the overall aim is to equip the learner with the skills to apply mathematical and statistical principles in problem solving and decision making. So we are basically looking at this course, and what the overall aim is for you to get the skills and knowledge that you need to be able to apply both the mathematical and the statistical principles and concepts to help you make a decision about the different aspects. So those are some of the learning outcomes that I expected. Of course, when you look at K, this letter K here represents the knowledge. This is comprehensive for C. This is letter E is showing the application of the different aspects. So we have the detailed syllabus. Of course, when you look at the detailed syllabus, we have the introduction. I'm just going to look at it as chapters. Chapter A is for the introduction, and within the introduction there are certain things that we shall first look at. First of all, we shall look at the importance of quantitative techniques, the role of statistics and mathematical models as we are going to see them. Then section B, or chapter B, we shall be looking at what we call the data collection and presentation. Of course, within the data presentation and collection, we shall look at the different aspects as you can see them. Then we look at chapter C, or chapter 3, where we shall be looking at the descriptive statistics, where we shall be looking at different items to do with measure of central tendency, measure of dispersion, and so many other aspects. Then we look at part D, that has things to do with probability and influence statistics. Of course, you base on as I told you, these are mathematical concepts that help us to make decisions, and you can also see that when you handle probability, you can be able to determine different aspects. And for influence statistics, just to make conclusions about a given aspects, as we shall look at them. So we look at chapter E, that deals with the mathematical modeling, where we shall have things to do with the linear algebra, calculus, and other stuff as we shall see them. So the part F is, or chapter F, is where we shall look about the time series and forecasting, where we shall be looking at time series analysis plus forecasting. So those are the main things that we are going to be looking at, and without wasting more time, let's try to go through some of the key things that we need to talk about as far as the introduction is concerned. So this paper will have, of course, if you look at the exam structure, they are saying there will be a 3-hour examinations that is made up of 6 questions, and among these 6 questions, a candidate, you're required to attempt any 5, and each of them has 20 marks. So let's try to look at the key things that we can talk about as far as this is concerned. We look at maybe so that's all that is there. Let's try and look at the introduction to statistics. Introduction to statistics. Now we need to understand by the end of this chapter 1 of the introduction, we need to understand different aspects. We need to know we need to be able to define the term statistics. We need also to be able to understand the different types of statistics, where we have things to do with the discrete statistics. We shall be able to know the differences between descriptive statistics and then the inferential statistics. Inferential statistics. Then the other thing, we need to understand the things to do with the defining a sample and a population. We need to know the difference between a sample and a population. We also need to be able to state the limitations of statistics, as well as the importances of statistics, and maybe the application areas of statistics. So those are some of the things that we want to look at as far as this is concerned. So let's start with defining the meaning of statistics. Meaning of the word statistics. Now, statistics is a distinct mathematical science which deals with the study of the methods that are used in correction, classification, organization, presentation, and analysis and interpretation of data. So we need to be able to understand the definition of statistics when we have included all these aspects, because for us to be able to understand the definition, we need to incorporate all these items, and we'll be able to understand what do we mean by collection of data, what do we mean by presentation, organization, or analysis of data. So I've said that definition wise, statistics, we have said that statistics is a distinct mathematical science. Statistics is a distinct mathematical science, a distinct mathematical science which deals with the study of the methods, that are used, in the collection, classification, organization, presentation, analysis, and interpretation of data or data. So that's as far as the definition is concerned for statistics. Of course, those are the different key things that we have to include when we are defining. It is a distinct mathematical science which deals with the study of the methods. We had not included the methods, which deals with the study of the methods. Which deals with the study of the methods. Methods that are used It deals with the methods that are used It deals with the methods that are used in It deals with the methods that are used in collection, classification, organization, presentation, analysis, and interpretation of data. The other definition, if you don't give it in that perspective, you can also present it as, you can also say that statistics is a science is a science of data. Statistics is a science of data that involves is the science of data that involves collecting, the science of data that involves collecting, organizing, involves collecting, organizing, that involves collecting, organizing, analyzing, and interpretation. Interpretation of data in order to make decisions. So you can use any of these definitions. You can say statistics is a science of data that involves collecting, organizing, analyzing, interpreting data in order to make decisions. So, the moment you talk about statistics, just know it's not a one-way aspect. It's it's like a process whereby you collect data. There is what we call data collection of data. You can collect data through maybe surveys. For example, if you use survey, that would be the first step. Then the second step, of course, you present the data. You present data. Of course, this can be presented in forms of charts or graphs. Charts, graphs, or tables. Can be charts and tables. Then the other aspect, we can, the third aspect, we can, of course, here it deals with organization. This is characterization or characterizing data. Of course, in this you can maybe try to compute the averages, the median, and so on. Now, once you are done with that, the fourth item is to do what we call data analysis. Data analysis, you analyze the data. Now, as you analyze the data or you try to interpret the data, the question that you are going to be having is, why do I do this? You are going to ask your question, why you are doing the analysis. Of course, the main reason as why you are going to be doing the analysis is for you to make sure that you make a decision. It's all about decision making. So whatever you're going to be going through is going to help you make a decision with the data that you have collected. So what is very key as far as statistics is concerned is for us to make sure that we understand these different items or different terminologies: the collection of data, the classification, organization, presentation, and analysis and interpretation of data, so that we can be able to make the decision. So we have to understand those aspects for us to be able to know that when I'm dealing with such item to do with the statistics, I'm able to cut out all those different items collectively. Now, maybe we can try to get an example. What could be an example that we can use to be able to get out of or pick out some of these different items that we talked about: the collection, the classification, organization, presentation, analysis, and interpretation of data. So we can have maybe an example to help ourselves get an understanding. Example: now let's assume that you want to collect information. If maybe you are told to collect information about the performance, we are going to look for information about the performance of students the performance of students in this same paper, the qualitative techniques, quantitative, the performance of students in this quantitative techniques, or what we call the QT. You are trying to find out how the students have performed, maybe in different years. Maybe we are trying to look at the performance of students within the last 3 years, within the last 3 years. Now, the first thing that you are going to ask yourself is, where am I going to get this information? Of course, you'll go to the institute, because that's where you are going to get the performance of the students. You go to the institute to look for what we call the performance records. You collect the performance records from the Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Uganda. So the first step of data collection, is that we are going to look, the information we are going to be basically looking at is we are collecting information from the Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Uganda about the performance record. So we are looking at the performance records. And where are we finding this information? From the institute, from the ICPAU, Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Uganda. That's where we are going to collect the information. So once we have collected the performance records, then it means that the collection part is done. Now, the second question we are going to ask ourselves is, how are we going to be able to classify or do the classification of that data that we have received? Of course, I've told you that from the collection, we've been able to get the performance records for the students for all the 3 years from the Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Uganda. Now, the second thing that we need to do is classification. The question is, how are we going to classify this information that we have received? Now, one thing that you are going to notice is that the information about performance of students in that one particular paper for the entire 3 years, we are going to have a lot of information. You can choose to classify this information based on years. You can say, me, I'm going to be looking at the years. Maybe I look at year 1, year 2, year 3. I classify the information. I look at the performance records in year 1, the performance records in year 2, then the performance records in year 3. That's classification. You can also decide to classify your information based on ladies and gentlemen. You can say maybe male students, maybe in year 1, in year 1, then female students in that same year. So you do it for all the 3 years. That is classification. It depends on what you are looking for, in terms of, because you need to have an idea of, what am I going to do with this information that I have received. If I want to benchmark on the performance of the students as far as the 3 years are concerned, then I will be able to know how I'm going to do my reporting of the performance of the students, depending on the information that I've collected. So the classification, most of the times it goes with the organization. You are trying to organize the information that you have received from the institute about the performance records for all the students, whether they are male or female. So you can choose to say that I'm going to classify this information in years, as we have said, or you can choose to say that I'm going to classify this information based on male and female, maybe their gender or sex type. Now, when you're done with that, you can go ahead to say that even though maybe, let me assume I have chose to organize this information in years. Now, I'm going to ask myself, how can I organize this information that I've got? I've got the performance for year 1, the performance for year 2, the performance for year 3. Now, you can say I'm going to organize this information based on the gender, and I look at for male students and then the female students under organization. That let me organize this information. I look at the students who are male, then the students who are female. Now, even when we have done that, it's not enough. Why? Because the male students for the different years are going to be a little bit more. We are going to have a lot of information because the years, remember, in 1 year we have almost, we used to have four sittings. Now they reduced them to 3. So if you have 1 year, you have June sitting, August sitting, and then the December sitting. For all the information, even if that information you have organized it in terms of the male students and then the female students, you are going to find that the information is going to be a little bit huge. So what do we need to do? We go now to presentation. How best can we present this information? Remember, we are trying to look at the performance of students, maybe in this quantitative techniques. The presentation goes ahead to look at, maybe I want to look at the, first of all, they are male students, but I categorize them based on their scores. You can say, if it comes to presentation of data, we can come to say that we are going to present this information using tables, and within the tables we are going to put the scores, then the number of students, then the students. Remember, we had organized our students into the female and then the male. You can choose to have a table where you're going to have the scores. And now the question you are going to ask yourself, among these scores, how am I going to present the scores? Remember, if we are looking at the performance of the students. So we have those students who have passed, we have those students who have failed. And someone may want to go ahead and do a deeper analysis that even those who have passed, how have they passed? Because you can look at, you can say, okay, I'm going to categorize those who have got maybe 50 to 60, because those that they have passed, as long as someone has above 50 has passed. But I want to know who are those people who may be passed with, let's say, 80 plus or 70 plus or 60 plus. Even here, among those who have failed, we know that these have failed, but the question is, if you get below 50, it means you have failed, you have not passed. But there are those who have completely failed and they have got 0 to maybe to 10. There are those who have got maybe 30 to 40. They have failed, but they were close to passing. All this information is going to help you understand what can I do to improve the performance of the students? Because if you find that majority of the students, maybe they have failed, but majority of them, they may be within 30 to 40, that's their scores. It means that these students, even though they have failed, but maybe they lacked something small for them to actually pass, as opposed to having the people who have failed when they have gotten 0 to 10. So you can be able to analyze all this information. But remember, this information is going to be, there are those that are going to be female students, but they scored maybe from 0 to 10. So it depends on what conclusion are we likely to, or what do we really trying to assess. One of the objective, the overall objective can be, I want to look at how many students pass CPA, maybe how many students have passed the quantitative techniques, but they are female or they are male. So it depends on the objectives. If you want to just look at the student pass rates, you make a conclusion on whether CPA is hard or is easy. For the different years that you have covered the information, to confirm whether the paper was hard or it was fair, then you can be able to do the needful. Of course, you'll have different ways of how you are going to present this information. Other people may want to present this information in terms of graphs, charts. Maybe I want to put in a pie chart. Maybe I want to present this information in a histogram. Maybe I want to present this information using a box and a Wixar plot. So it depends on what you are trying to achieve that will determine what method you are going to use to be able to arrive at the thing that you want to prove. Now, if I go to data analysis, of course, this data analysis, we can take it in a sense that it's like more of processing what we have known that we have presented our figures correctly in a table, maybe scores, and then the students. Maybe you have looked at the number of students who have passed and those who have passed in different score ranges. Then we are going to analyze. When you're analyzing this information, we are going to do what we call computations. For example, we can compute the average. We say maybe the average mark for the students maybe who have passed was maybe 60% for such and such a year. We can also go ahead to look at maybe the people who have failed, that at least or on average 50% of the students actually failed and their scores were below 10%, or they were below 20%, or they failed but their scores were above 40%, or they have scored at least 40 and above. So depending on the information that you have, you can also try to compute the model mark, where you can look at that on that in such a year, maybe in year 3, the majority of the students scored 60%, and that's our model mark, because we know mod is, you look at the how many students have gotten that the class or the mark with the highest frequency. It will be our model mark. You can compute the median, you can compute the mean. So it depends on how you want to make your conclusion, because for me, I can just maybe use one method. I want to use the average to make the decision or to make the conclusion from what I've tried to look out for, depending on what I'm proving. So The analysis is going to be in terms of using the mathematical formulas and concepts to be able to compute. Because this information is going to help us maybe to do some predictions in the future, that based on how the students have been performing in the last 3 years, we expect maybe the pass rate to be around such and such, or we expect based on the relevant or past data for the last 3 years people sat the exams, we are likely to have maybe an increment of 10% in the number of students who are sitting the exams in the following years. So it can help you to do the planning, it can help you to forecast, to know how they even want to improve. Maybe majority of the students have found some topics hard for them to analyze and be able to interpret and be able to answer them correctly. The question is, what can we do, or what can we advise? That's why you find that on every examination, when they are giving out the results, you find that they always give the marking guide and plus the examiner's remarks. The examiner's remarks are always entailing information based on how the examiner has found the students performing on different questions of the papers that have been set out. So what we are trying to look at here is we get all this, we go through the process. It's not a one-time thing. It's a series of different processes that we go through to make sure that we make the decision. Now, once you have done the analysis, maybe you have used mean, maybe you have done measure of dispersion, how different aspects are spread, maybe from the middle point or from the average value, how far are they from the average, or you have used the measure of central tendency where we computed the mean, mode, and median. So, or you are trying to do all that kind of the computations that's within the data analysis. Now, when we go to the interpretation of data is all about looking at the computations. We get the computed results, the computed figures, and we try to make meaning out of them. How? I can look at the mean. Maybe I can say that the average age of students failing the paper is maybe 60, or I can say 50 or 60 years. Now, of course, when you look at this information, you have computed the average and you have found that most of the students who fail these exams, they are above 60, or they are above 30. Let's take the 30 years. They are above 30. Which conclusion can you make out of this computation? You have to analyze and find out that maybe these students who are above 30, because of the fact that they have so much responsibilities, they don't give much time, they don't allocate more time to reading and understanding these concepts because of the different responsibilities that they have. You can find that majority of the students who pass maybe are below 25. Of course, you can make an analysis, or you can interpret that information and say that because of the fact that young people are always have time with less responsibilities, so they can be able to put that time to focus on the different topics and understand them and do thorough revision so that they can be able to pass. So you find that the examiner is going to be giving these remarks based on how the students have performed. That's what we call the interpretation. You don't just compute the results and leave them there. If I've computed that maybe the average mark that people have scored for the 3 years of data records that I've looked at, I've found maybe these students are actually getting 60%. We can look at the 60% and we say, what does this 60% communicate to us? If I found maybe the people who fail, they fail by a mark, maybe they get maybe 45, 47, 43, that's the average of the people who failed. Of course, you will be able to make a conclusion that maybe these people just need to push some topics. Of course, you can look at, you can say that the students who have maybe failed, their average score rate is 45%. But the 45% came as a result, maybe there are some, of course, you look at how they have done their topics. Because remember, for you to get these 45%, you need to get the breakdown of how they have performed in each question. You can look at how they are performed in some questions. Of course, these questions come from different topics. You make a recommendation based on the topics that more emphasis should be put on such topics, because we have seen, based on the data, that students are actually failing these questions. So these are some of the things that we can do. Now, once you have done the interpretation, you have interpreted the results that you have computed. The last question is now to develop a report and make a decision. If you have seen that very many students fail because they don't complete or they don't get a thorough understanding of the different topics that we examine, my response would be to make students read thoroughly. And one of the example that I can tell you is that ICPA used to have 4 sittings around 2022. They used to have a March sitting. We used to have a March sitting. Then we used to have a June sitting, and we used to have an August sitting, and then finally a December sitting. Now, as ASPAO removed the March sitting, maybe they have these people might have done research and found out that maybe some students don't prepare themselves enough within the first 3 months. Because if these people sat exams in December and they are coming back to sit exams in March next year, it means these people only have like 2 months to cover all the things that they are going to be examined on. But if you remove this March sitting and you allow people to have close to 6, let me say close to 5 months of serious reading, then 1 month for preparation, then we are able to tell that these people are actually going to cover all the syllabus within the 5 months. If they have started the exams in December, then from January to May, they are reading. And once they read, they do, maybe they are covering syllabus. The coverage of the syllabus is okay. You'll find that you'll have more pass rates in the June sitting, June/May sitting, because students have have been able to capture all the different topics. At least 80% of the syllabus has been covered, which wasn't possible if you had the December sitting, then you also bring in the March sitting. That would be one of the reasons as to why they removed the March sitting, because as of now we have June, August, and then the December sittings. And even when we have these 3 sittings, this August sitting is only for people in Kampala. The reason is very simple. Maybe it will be very hard for them to prepare for all these people in the different sittings that we have in the country. If we are to do June sitting, then August sitting, because there is a very short period of time from June to August. Those are only 2 months. So it means, logically speaking, this June sitting, maybe this August sitting is maybe to cover those people who have failed in the June sitting, so that they can have extra 2 months to cover the things that are going to be examined in August sitting. And for the ASPAW not to allow this sitting to be for all the students, they are trying to limit on the number of students that they can have. Because if you give yourself a very small space, you have to mark these scripts for all the students in the country. It will be very hard. That's why we find that this August sitting always has a relatively small number of students attempting papers. For them to create to give themselves time to be able to analyze the performance that has been there for June, so that they can find improvements on how they can set exams based on how the students have performed in different questions. Of course, when you look at, maybe majority of the students have passed a certain topic, of course it's probable that you can say that maybe next sitting it may not appear. So all of that helps you to analyze and make decisions based on what is going to help your, whether you're doing the research or whether you're doing anything. So I'm finalizing this by saying that when you look at statistics, as we study statistics, just understand that it's not a one-way. Idea. It's a lot. We combine different aspects, and within these aspects, they are the ones that are going to help us understand what really matters. And if you get this introduction very well, you are going to find quantitative techniques very easy for you to go through it, because it's a process, and the process involves mathematical formulas, mathematical concepts. Like if I look at the mean, I have to involve in a formula. Mode, median, I have to involve in a formula depending on how the data is. Because if I have just a simple data, maybe I have like 10 students, I will use a simple formula because the students are very few. If I have students that are in thousands, and I'm dealing maybe with the data of those students, of those 1,000 students, maybe for 20 years, meaning they are 20 times more information, then I also have to put in more complicated formulas that can help me make computations easy, so that I can be able to interpret and analyze those results that I have computed to make the decision. So as I conclude, we have said that statistics is a distinct mathematical science which deals with the study of methods that are used in collection, classification, organization, presentation, and analysis and interpretation of data in order to make the informed decisions. So what we are going to look at, I've spent a lot of time explaining the definition because I want you to understand and appreciate that some of the things that we are going to be doing are going to be interconnected. There is no way you are going to analyze the data that you have not collected. There is no way you are going to present data that you have not organized. And you organize this data based on the objective or what you are trying to achieve. So you should always ask yourself, why am I organizing this data this way? Even when you are picking the method to use, is that method helping you to achieve your desired objective? And I hope that explains why we say that statistics is a science. It's not an art, because we do so many things to do with mathematical computations. So that's all that I wanted to explain as far as the definition is concerned. I've given you an example that if one wanted to get information about the performance of students in quantitative techniques for the last 3 years, then one thing, someone is going to collect information from the ALSPAL. That will be the collection of data. So you will seek the performance records from the institute. 2, those performance records, you are going to group them into what we call frequency distribution tables. You can just call it table, because if it has a frequency, it shows the number of times something has happened. Depending on how you analyze the information, I can be analyzing the information to look at how many students have scored between 10 and 20, between 30 and 40, between 50 and 100. So once you have analyzed the data into what we call the frequency distribution tables, then that data is going to be subjected to computations. You compute the mean, you compute the average, you compute the variances, and then you can now be able to come to an analysis, and then you interpret the results that you have computed. You explain, if the mean is 20, what is that indicating based on the research that you are trying to find out. You interpret the data, then give the people. It might be, you might be hired as an accountant, you might be hired as a consultant, that when you have gotten this information, I've computed the mean, but the people I'm going to give these reports, they don't understand what the mean is like. So you go ahead to interpret for them that if the mean is 30, maybe it shows that 30% of maybe the students passed, or 30% of the students failed. We always see those kind of projections or those kind of reports being made whenever they are releasing those examinations. They tell you that maybe we had such and such a number of students who sat, the such and such number of students paid the examination fees, but they didn't show up for the examination. They never did the full exam. And they tell you that out of those who did the exams, such and such a number passed, such and such a number failed. And then when you go ahead to look at the examination guidelines or the marking guides, the examiners go ahead to tell you a detailed analysis of those who failed and how they failed certain numbers and what made them fail, and it gives the recommendations on what should be done for those students to actually score more marks in the relevant topics or the relevant questions that were examined at that sitting. So that's all that I can talk about as far as the introduction is concerned, because you need to get this introduction very loud and clear for you to be able to understand before we drill into what we call the computations and other aspects. See you in the next video as we are talking about the importance of statistics. Of course, from this very video that we have talked about, you have seen that I have made highlights on what are some of the importances of doing whatever statistics, whether it's a descriptive or it's an inferential statistics. I've labored to give that it can be used for planning, forecasting, controlling, and all that. Those are the things that we are going to look at in the next video. See you there.